Inland Waterway Association and Canal River Trust Restoration Workshop on driving forward diversity at the National Trust. So just want to say thank you all for joining us today, and we're all looking forward to hearing from Tiger and his experience with the National Trust. I'm going to pass over now. Thank you.
Brilliant stuff. Thanks, Alex. So today I'm going to share with you the evolution of our inclusion plan at the National Trust, and then at the end, once I've been through that, so there'll be like a summary slide where I'll reflect on what we've covered, and then at the end I've got a few tips, so some more practical suggestions about things you might want to consider or think about in terms of your own inclusive practice. So just to get things going, there we go. So yeah, in the beginning, so I joined the Trust just over 3 years ago, so I joined January 2018. And at that time, we had what I believed was a diversity plan rather than an inclusion plan. And I was keen to move us away from that. And the reason for that is because I think that if you set your focus and your stall on creating a more inclusive environment that is more equitable, where people feel a greater sense of belonging, then diversity will happen as a result. If you focus on diversity, you can sometimes drive unhelpful or non-useful behaviours and outcomes, and potentially also limit the sustainability of the changes that you introduce. There's a great phrase by inclusion expert in America called Verna Myers. She talks about diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. I've got a slightly different version of this framing, which is that, if you imagine that you're organising a party and you invite me along, so I come along to join your party because, I'm different to your other friends and you want to have a more diverse group of people there, that's all well and good. But if you decide that the music you're going to play at the party is 80s tribute headlined by Prefab Sprout, if you decide that you're going to serve up pizza covered in pastrami and salami and pepperoni, but you haven't connected or engaged with me, and I turn up and I'm like, well, I like a bit of R&B, that's what my preferred music choice is. I can't eat gluten, so I like gluten-free food, and I'm also a vegetarian. You haven't catered for me. So there is something for me about when we are thinking about inclusion, it's not about having different faces or people from different identities within the room. It's about have we created an environment where they feel free, welcome, and able to be themselves. And when we started talking about inclusion at the National Trust, I quoted Mark Twain in a session that I did for our leaders, and it's really important that we think about the fact that, and be open about the fact that we recognise things aren't quite right as they are. I love this phrase, "The Nile ain't just a river in Egypt," that we need to be open and willing to accept the fact that things need to be fundamentally different in order for us to produce and develop the solutions that will lead us into a better future state. And part of that is about being willing and being prepared to be uncomfortable. So this is another slide I often use when I'm leading sessions at the Trust as an introduction to say, some of the subject matter we might cover today, but when you think about doing your own inclusive work, will make you feel uncomfortable. Understanding your current data, the current experiences that people have, may well make you feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. And there's a bit of stuff I'll share with you at the back end about how you deal with that and how you manage that degree of discomfort as you move through it. But noticing that you're feeling uncomfortable, but getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is a really important attribute that you can bring to any work you're looking to do around diversity and inclusion. So getting into some of the bones of the stuff. So we had this project called Green Academies, and here's a snapshot of some of the statistics of that program. And the aim was around targeting young people, getting young people from different backgrounds more actively engaged in our environmental work. And it was successful in the sense that, we hit the numbers, we had a much more diverse group of young people coming in. But the problem was, because it wasn't rooted in a systemic organisational change, and it was a bolt-on project, that it became non-sustainable. It wasn't embedded in as part of our ongoing day-to-day ways of working. There were challenges around where the funding was going to come from because it had been funded externally. And the challenge that we had is we had this brilliantly successful program that had run for 3 years in the trust, but once the funding cycle came to an end, it became more and more challenging and difficult for us to actually embed the practice and to make it sustainable. So one of the things that we've put at the forefront of our work on inclusion at the National Trust is how do we look at the system? How do we create a cultural, environmental and behavioural change that means that our ways of working shift in such a way that inclusion becomes part of our day-to-day activity and isn't a project that we deliver on the side? So where do we begin? So we began with a theory of change. Now, I don't want to get overly technical and overly geeky on this, but essentially a theory of change is a really simple way of starting with where you want to be as an organisation. So you start with your ambition and then you work backwards. So you figure out where is it we want to get to as an organisation? What is the big thing that we want to see change? For us, our original ambition was to be inclusive and welcoming, connecting and inspiring people to make a difference. But wherever your ambition is, you start there. You then identify what might be 3. I'd advise not to have more than 4 outcome areas or goals. And those are your big ticket items that say, in order to achieve that ambition, we need to focus intently on these 4 areas. And if we deliver against these 4 areas, that will definitely help and enable us to get to where we're going to go to. And you then break those outcome areas down into what will be outputs that we would have. And then you break those down into activities. So what you end up with is a detailed list of actions that you need to undertake, and understanding around the milestones that will give you an indication of whether you're making the progress you want to see. And all of those activities would ladder up to getting you towards your ambition. And because it's a theory, you don't have to go out and gather enormous amounts of evidence to prove the theory is going to work. The idea of a theory of change is it's a flexible and evolving model whereby you're going to effectively test something. So you've got a theory that if you do these things, it will lead to the change that you're looking for. But if it doesn't, you don't beat yourself up. You just look at what have we learned through the process, adapt, change, and then go again. So in terms of our initial inclusion plan, we were going great guns. So by January and February 2019, we had a whole load of planned activity that was already either underway or was about to commence. We'd sourced additional funding externally, a huge chunk of funding to support our physical access work. We'd made an organisational commitment to tell more inclusive histories. So we knew we had a lot of work to do, but we were reassured we had a really strong, cogent plan that was going to help us to get there. And then the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, it caused us a number of challenges. A lot of the challenges were around the fact that to progress a lot of our work, we needed people to be visiting our places. People weren't visiting our places because they were closed. And therefore, it was very difficult for us to progress. We had huge numbers of staff placed on furlough. I think at one point we had 80+% of our workforce on furlough. And it meant that some of the activities that we were starting to see benefit from, such as our new approach to recruitment, or the values work that we had done, or the training that we had developed, were going to have to be paused. And it was a frustration for us. This is our handbook from, I think it's a 2019 handbook, where we've got a really clear statement in there around for everyone, forever. And it's when we say for everyone, we mean it. And from us, from an inclusion standpoint, we could, and we originally had, focus on very specific audiences. So I know when I joined, there were distinct and discrete underrepresented audiences that the organisation had identified as being an area of focus. And rather than progressing with that, what we did is took a step back and talked about how do we broaden this, recognising that people have multiple identities. We'll touch a bit more on this later on. And that actually approach to being more inclusive rather than trying to attract and retain specific audience groups would be more beneficial and advantageous for us as an organisation. So why does inclusion matter to the National Trust? So we've broken down our why, and why our why is really important, into 3 distinct areas. So the first is that we are an employer of scale. So we have, I think, just under 10,000 staff in our workforce. We have over 50,000 volunteers who support us on an ongoing basis. And we have a duty to them to ensure that when they come to work or they come to volunteer, they can do so in an environment where they won't be discriminated against or bullied or harassed, where they feel able to bring their whole selves, to be themselves in that space, and to feel supported by their peers and in the work that they do. Our second duty is to our supporters. So those are our members, our visitors, people who engage with us both on our sites and off our sites, but that they will have an experience that will be inclusive, that they won't face barriers to entry, that they won't face challenges because of their identity or because of any barriers that we've put up in terms of access, etc. For them. So that's our second area of duty. And our final area of duty is to the nation. So we recognise that we are custodians of heritage and custodians of natural space and natural landscape that the nation has a right to access. And we have a responsibility within that to not only ensure that our places are open and accessible to the whole of society and the whole of the nation, but the stories that we tell and the narratives that we share are reflective of the complex, broad and diverse history that we care for. So those are the 3 drivers as to why inclusion matters to us as an organisation, and it's deeply embedded in our founding principles and in the aspirations of our founders back in 1895. So our inclusion plan, we refer to and we've titled as Everyone Welcome. This is our commitment, and our aim is for it to run through and cut across everything we do. And we've done things from developing training interventions for all of our staff and volunteers, to rewriting our values, to thinking about physical, financial and intellectual access to our places, our collections and our stories, considering who we currently appeal to, how we can sustain their relationship with us, whilst at the same time reaching out and broadening our appeal to others. So it's definitely not about displacement. We are keen to equally provide an improved and enhanced service to our current and existing members and visitors, as well as to those who haven't yet experienced what we have to offer. So a question and a challenge for us to be more relevant to more people. And I'm fortunate in the trust that our executive team, led by Hilary McGrady, are 100% behind our commitment. And Hilary is definitely leading this from the top and walking the walk as well as talking the talk. Thinking through our theory of change, what we did during the time we had between February last year, when we recognised that the pandemic was going to impact on our plans, through to this year, is to go into a process of consultation and engagement, both with people inside our organisation, but also with people outside. So we have an external advisory group, a challenge group is what we call them, comprising of individuals from a range of different identities who can give us their perspective on what we're doing, that can push us harder when they feel that we need to, who can give us guidance in tackling sticky, difficult or thorny subject matter, and give us confidence that we are making the progress that we have committed to make. We also spoke internally with our teams. We think it's really important that everyone feels a shared sense of ownership of our inclusion plans and our commitment to being a more inclusive organisation. And so we have 3 streams of activity within our theory of change. And the three focal areas in terms of our outcomes are building a culture and environment where everyone feels welcome, and then having greater relevance to all parts of a changing society, recognising, particularly over the past 12 months, that there's been a rapid evolution, shift and change in the context in which we're operating, and that will continue to happen. And then finally, hopefully looking to see a shift in diversity at the back end of this activity, so that more people are looking to work and volunteer with us, as well as to become members of our supporter base, either as members of the organisation, as donors, or as visitors. So that's our commitment to inclusion, and those are the areas where we are focusing on dialing up our activity in order to deliver that ambition. So this is it broken down into a bit more detail. So a little bit more understanding of thinking, as well as the goals that sit at the top of our thinking. But yeah, recognizing things like, making our places more accessible, or working with and through others has been an important cog in our wheel. And we are moving towards, hopefully in the spring this year, this is our ambition, to be much more transparent with the external world about not only our commitment to inclusion, but where we are currently in terms of our performance, and enabling people to transparently monitor our progress and whether we are delivering and living up to the aspirations that we are outlining. So moving on to 2021, this year is a challenging and difficult one for us. Last year, from a personal perspective, is probably the hardest year I've had in my working life. But this year, we've suffered from a significant reduction in income. I think our latest estimates are looking at over £250 million, and that we were only looking at gradually starting to reopen our places. I think our outdoor sites are due to reopen in April in time for Easter, and our houses are looking at reopening at some point in the middle of May. So there's a lot of work that our teams are doing as people return from furlough, as we get back up, as we try to open up in a way that we have never done as an organisation, to a public that we know are going to descend upon us en masse, and where our places will be overwhelmed because people have been desperate through lockdown to get out, particularly in terms of our outdoor sites, but as well in terms of into some of our houses, and to experience what the Trust has to offer. So there's going to be a huge amount of pressure on our people, and we recognise that, and instead of overloading too much stuff on them through this year, we are going to keep our inclusion focus simply on improving culture, capability and confidence of our people. So we've had a challenging year, and there has been some external challenges as well in terms of some of the inclusion work that we've done, and some of our staff have said that they are really behind the agenda. They really want to support us to deliver against the agenda, but they're nervous they might get things wrong. They're not sure they've got the confidence to get things right. So we're going to have an intense focus on how do we support an evolution of our culture and values as an organisation. How do we build the capability, particularly of our senior leaders, to be more inclusive? How do we ensure that we are connecting our staff and our volunteers both with the agenda, but also with how they can help us make a difference? And then finally, how do we think about access and accessibility, both physically on our sites, but also virtually when people engage with us? So that's where we're going to place our emphasis. And we're also looking at delivering other key activities. So This Is Us is an internal campaign that we ran at the beginning of February. So I mentioned the significant economic impact that we've faced this year, and that has led us to have to make a number of changes and restructure, and sadly we've lost a lot of great people out of the organisation. And in conversation with the exec, one of the things that we wanted to do when we were restarting was not go back to normal, not go back to the way things were, but restart with purpose, restart with a commitment to live up to the aspiration and ambition we've set ourselves to be a more inclusive organisation. And so at the beginning of February this year, we ran an internal campaign to raise awareness about inclusion and also to build people's confidence and capability. As part of that, we had a range of activities. So we had some powerful conversations where we brought underrepresented members of staff together with members of the executive team to talk about their lived experience within the trust, but also to identify things that we could do differently that would improve their experience. And there have been some immediate takeaways and things that have changed almost instantly. So as an example, Hilary produces a video blog once a month that goes out to all of our staff and our volunteers. And it's her way of connecting in a much more personal way with our people. And Hilary's a very outdoors person. So what she does tend to do is she tends to go out for a walk when she delivers her vlog. So she'll be there with her hand up, recording herself, talking to her phone and providing her reflections on the month that we've just had. In one of these powerful conversations, one of our members of staff raised to her that they find it quite discombobulating, so it's difficult for them to watch her while she's moving about. So on the back of hearing that, Hilary did her next one, sat down, but then also produces just an audio file so that when she's doing the ones where she's walking about, that people can be able to still engage with that. So it's a small change, but what it's meant is that, you know, a group of our staff and potentially volunteers now feel much more connected and considered in terms of the outputs that we do. So we had the three powerful conversations which we had facilitated externally. So we brought an external facilitator in who was skilled in inclusion and diversity work to manage and to ensure that those conversations went well, and led to a series of outcomes which we are calling our shared commitments, which we'll be launching in the organisation in April. And those will be things that we are saying to our people, expect us to deliver against these commitments that are based on the conversations that we had with you throughout the inclusion fortnight. Our networks, we've got three of them. So there's one which is for our disabled colleagues, one for staff and volunteers of colour, and there's another one which is for our LGBTQ+ staff and volunteers. The second big thing that we did invite some internal speakers in. So we had a theme for each week. So the first week was around different experiences during lockdown. And then the second week was focusing on the power of difference. Now, there are a range of things where lockdown has impacted on me. So, and I like to think about my identity in an intersectional way. And what that means is, rather than thinking about individual characteristics that I might have and seeing those independently, is that you think about the crossovers and the intersections between those different elements of someone's identity and what impact it may have. So obviously, as a person of colour, which you can see in the video, I found the spring last year and the Black Lives Matters protests particularly challenging, and there was ongoing racial conversations that happened through the UK. I have a hidden and an invisible disability, so I have MS. So as someone who wasn't furloughed, the volume of work that we went through, I again found that quite challenging in terms of trying to manage my own personal health and well-being to keep up with the pace of change and the volume of activity that we needed to do with a reduced staff team. I'm a parent, I've got two wonderful children, but have spent significant proportions of the year homeschooling. That in itself has brought challenges. So there were a range of different ways in which I was impacted through the pandemic and the lockdowns that we've had. And that relates to my identity. And part of the reason for our focus in the first week was, let's start to elevate and share wider stories of how things have impacted on different people in different ways, and then what we could do as colleagues to be responsive and to be supportive of those. So we had those external speakers. We had some web chats where staff were able to engage and interact on a number of subjects. And we encouraged some blogs. So our network chairs wrote blogs. We had members of staff who were inspired to share their own personal stories within the trust. Some of them really positive, some of them not so positive. But what we ended up with was a really good flavour of different perspectives, different experiences that enriched the conversations that we were having about what could we do differently to be a more inclusive organisation. And some of the key themes are listed there in terms of things that came out of the powerful conversations that were also underlined, I think, by some of the other activities and interactions we had across that fortnight that will form the basis and the cornerstone of the shared commitments that we'll be launching in April. So this is some of the feedback that we had in relation to it. Overall, overwhelming sense of positivity. So many people engaged with the programme, either in live sessions or by downloading and viewing resources after sessions had taken place, both across that fortnight and beyond. And there was a lot of positivity, but there was, as always, it was the first time we've ever done it, and there were things that we can learn that we are going to input into what we do moving forward. So although this was the first year that we did it, we have already committed that we will do another This Is Us campaign in 2022. So just a quick summary on what I've covered. So I think there's something really important when you're thinking about inclusion and diversity to start with why. People need to understand what's the driver behind it and why is this important to us? Why is it important for us? We're in a society that has been through enormous trauma. Certain pockets of our society have been disproportionately impacted and affected by the pandemic. I read a statistic the other day that I think it's something like 88% or some, so I think it's 88 or 80 odd percent of people who have lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic are aged under 35, with nearly 2/3 of those being under 25. The impact on people's mental health, etc. So let's start with why, but also understanding that the context and the environment and the society in which we are operating is constantly evolving. Focus on inclusion. Don't think, we're underrepresented with this audience. We need to get more of those people in. And I'll explain a little bit more around hidden, so visible and invisible difference on one of the later slides. Think about planning your approach. So it's really important to think through logically, what are we trying to do and how is it going to help us move forward? Theory of change might not be right for you as a model. It's worked for us, but something whereby you are being deliberate about what you are doing, why you are doing it, and how you are going to do it will help you to make the difference that you are looking to have. I think it's critically important that you work with others, both internally and externally. We spent a lot of time building relationships and networks with groups and individuals outside of our organisation that will help and enable us to deliver better outcomes. And we are deliberately amplifying the voices of underrepresented people. So a huge part of our plan is about how do we create a platform for those who we are seeking to serve to better understand their needs, but also enable them to influence others. And the final thing I would say is committing to measurable action. So don't be very specific and very clear on what success looks like. Don't limit yourself to thinking purely and solely about demographic data and diversity statistics. Think also about the lived experience of the underrepresented groups you're trying to reach. Think about whether or not people feel a true sense of being able to be themselves or feeling like they belong in the spaces that you care for. And then if those are the things that you feel are you're driving for, how are you going to measure whether or not you've delivered what you've aspired to do? So that's hopefully a helpful overview of the work that we've done at the Trust and how we've built our plan as promised, I'm just going to give you a few hints and tips that may help you in terms of thinking about what you do in terms of your own personal practice or your own local organisation. So a key question that often comes to me with people is, where do I start? You know, how do I get going? What do I do? You know, what's my starting point? And I love this cartoon. Just because you are right does not mean that I am wrong. You just haven't seen things from my side of life. And I think there is a danger, and we recognise it in the National Trust, being a large organisation, that there's a risk that we assume that because we are clear and confident about our truth, that the truths of others are not as relevant or as important. And actually, they've got a very different perspective, and their thoughts and ideas are equally valid. We just need to understand and appreciate where they're coming from and why. So I think that the number one tool in any inclusion or diversity practitioner's toolbox is curiosity. Curiosity is your superpower. If you are truly interested in understanding the viewpoint and opinion of others, if you want to know why they hold the views that they hold, or what their hopes and aspirations for the future are, and you are willing to incorporate that into your thinking, and to maybe alter and amend your own plans in order to be responsive to their needs and desires, you will both engage them, but also deliver outcomes that are beneficial to a wider range of individuals or people. And the second thing, so this is a picture that was taken of the audience. So I'm on stage at this point. So this was from our leadership event that we had in at the end of 2018, where we launched our Everyone Welcome program. And on the stage, I was saying to people at the moment, this isn't about me. So although I'm the lead for inclusion within the Trust, it's not about me and it's not about my team. That each and every one of us has a role to play, from senior leaders in the organisation to people on the front line, to our volunteers, to our senior managers. So it's really critically important that you, if you're leading, you're really able to clearly articulate the role that you need other people to play, but also that everyone is willing and understands they have to make a contribution, and that things will not be successful. You will not make the shift or the change you're aspiring to without an army and a collection of people working collaboratively together to deliver that outcome. I mentioned earlier on, I'll talk about visibility. And on that stage, in making that presentation, that was the time that I disclosed to members of staff at the Trust that both I had a disability, but also that I was introverted, and the impact introversion has on me in an organisation that is fundamentally driven and run and led by extroverts. So, you know, as an introvert, I find, you know, big groups of people, large group discussion, trying to respond in the moment rather than having the opportunity to reflect, immensely draining. And I need to go home. So I'm battery powered. I have to go home, plug myself in to recharge. Extroverts are solar powered. So they draw their energy from, you know, engagement with other people. That's where they get their energy from. So in those environments, they come alive. They're at the top of their game. And I think it's really important that, you know, as well as thinking about, you know, how my race and ethnicity impacts upon my experience within the workplace, how gender impacts on experience in the workplace, or age. There are other things that sit below the waterline that actually people may not feel comfortable sharing, that you may not be aware of, but that may be impacting upon someone's individual ability to engage with the work that you're doing and to meaningfully support any progress that you wish to make. So I think it's just really important to bear in mind the fact that actually a huge amount of difference we don't see. And if we don't see it, then we're not as aware of it. So we might look around our organisation and say that there's a dearth or a lack of black and brown faces, but we don't know around, you know, whether or not we've got a challenge or an issue around sexuality and people's openness and willingness and ability to be open about their sexuality in the workplace. So there is something really important in your inclusion work about thinking about the various different elements that comprise our identities, and creating a space and an environment where we feel comfortable to be able to both bring ourselves and bring our whole self to whatever we are doing, and that we won't be judged in relation to any of that. And the final thing I'll share with you before I close with a poem is vulnerability. Now, I don't know whether or not you've seen it, but Brené Brown does a brilliant TED talk on the power of vulnerability, and it's important to be vulnerable. It's not all of us have inherent bias. We are all flawed in many different ways, and to lead this work knowing that, but being confident about that, and being willing to explore our vulnerability, to build our knowledge and understanding, to be curious around the experience of others, to apologize when we get things wrong, and to commit to not repeating that mistake where we can, is important. So I would highly recommend you spend some time to familiarize yourself with Brené if you haven't had the opportunity to watch her TED talk yet. I'm not really doing her justice, so yeah, spend some time to look at that. And I'm going to finish with this poem by Portia Nelson. And this is the reflection piece I give to everyone that I coach or mentor or talk to about inclusion and diversity. Not only will we invariably get things wrong, but we are likely to repeat the same mistakes. And the important thing is that we feel that we are on a journey to, not making those mistakes again. So through this poem, and I'm sure you can think about moments in your life where you've done or experienced exactly this, where you've repeated an error and gradually over time you've got better at spotting the fact you're going to make that blunder or to make that error, and getting to the point where you're able to stop yourself before you get it wrong. So it's great to hear that you are interested in and are keen to address inclusion and diversity in the work that you all do. Be gentle with yourselves in the journey that you're embarking on. It's not necessarily always easy. There are times when it can be incredibly tough, but take a great degree of comfort in the fact that you are working alongside others that are equally committed, and that what you are doing is making a contribution to a fairer and more equitable society for all of us.